He thought he was sharing a cell with a man, until he learned that man had died 5 years earlier. The inmate who told this swore he wasn't crazy. He'd been transferred to a different wing of the prison, handed his mattress, and escorted to a 2-man cell that smelled like mildew and rust. Inside there was already someone on the top bunk. The guy didn't move much, just sat up, shoulders hunched, staring at the wall. He had a shaved head, skin pale in the fluorescent light, and eyes that looked wrong. They didn't blink, they just stayed open, like he'd forgotten how to close them. At first, the inmate didn't think much of it. He figured, fine, quiet cellmate, maybe a little weird, but better than some violent lunatic. But that first night, while he tried to sleep, he kept hearing soft whispers above him, not words he could make out, just a low, steady murmur, like a prayer or a confession. He sat up and asked the guy what he was saying. No response, just those same unblinking eyes staring at the wall, lips moving soundlessly. The days passed, and the inmate realized something was wrong. His cellmate never ate. Every time food trays came, the top bunk's tray stayed untouched. He never showered, never spoke, never moved except to sit and stare. The whispers at night grew louder, filling the room until it felt like the air itself vibrated. The inmate started banging on the door, shouting at guards.
"This guy's freaking me out!
Get him out of here!" But the guards just gave him strange looks. One even laughed and told him he needed more sleep. What really broke him was when he mentioned it to other prisoners in the yard. He pointed up at his cell window, said, "That guy on the top bunk, something's wrong with him." The other inmates exchanged glances. One of them leaned closer and said, "Man, you don't have a cellmate." He thought they were messing with him. Of course he did, but he couldn't shake the way they looked at him. Pity, not amusement. That night, desperate, he waited until lockdown and climbed up to the top bunk. Empty. No sheets, no mattress, no signs anyone had ever been there. Just bare metal, dusty, cold. But the second he laid back down on his own bunk, the springs above him groaned, as if someone had just shifted their weight. The whispers returned, louder than ever, circling his ears, brushing his skin like breath. He screamed for help until his voice cracked, but when the guards opened the door, they found him alone, thrashing in his sheets. The next day, he demanded to see the warden. He begged, said he was losing his mind. The warden, maybe out of pity, pulled his file and the housing records for that cell. After a long pause, he told the inmate something that made his blood run cold. That cell had been sealed years ago after a man hanged himself from the top bunk. No one had been placed there since. The paperwork showed only one occupant registered in that room. Him. The inmate swore he never stepped back in that cell again. They transferred him out after his breakdown, but he told anyone who'd listen what he'd seen. He said he still hears the whispering when he tries to sleep, and the strangest part, guards who walk past that old cell say sometimes, in the middle of the night, they hear the springs above the bottom bunk creak, slow and heavy, as if someone invisible has just climbed up there to lie down. The official records remain the same. No one has been housed in that cell for years. But every man who's ever spent a night in that block insists on the same thing at midnight. The top bunk still moves. They say the worst thing about solitary confinement isn't the silence. It's the noise that doesn't belong there. Imagine being locked in a 6x8 box, no windows, just a steel door with a narrow slot, the kind of place where time rots away and you forget your own name. Now imagine hearing someone scream from inside a cell that's supposed to be empty. That's what started happening in the old East Wing of Redgate Prison, and the men who were there still swear it was real. At first, it was just whispers. Inmates down the row claimed they heard muttering, like someone talking in their sleep. Guards rolled their eyes, told them to quit making things up, but the whispers got louder. They grew into sobs, then choked cries, until finally, late one night, the whole block snapped awake to the sound of blood, curdling screams echoing down the corridor. These weren't the angry shouts of a fight. Not the kind of noise you get when two men are throwing fists behind bars. This was pure panic, raw terror ripping out of a throat like someone was being burned alive. The men banged on their doors, yelling for the guards to check it out. When the guards stormed in, flashlights cutting through the dark, the noise stopped. Not faded. Stopped silence. Every man in that block leaned forward against their doors, waiting to hear what the officers would find. The sound had been coming from cell 3A. Everyone knew it. The guards unlocked it, shoved the heavy door open, lights sweeping across the concrete. Nothing. The cell was empty. No mattress, no sheets, no occupant. According to the logs, it hadn't housed an inmate in over 12 years. The guards brushed it off, said maybe the guys were hearing echoes from somewhere else in the prison. But the inmates knew better. They'd heard it clear as day, right in front of them, and over the next weeks, the screaming didn't stop. Every night around 200 a.m., like clockwork, the howling started again. Sometimes it was desperate begging, "Please, God, let me out." Sometimes it was a low, animalistic groan, the kind of noise that makes your stomach turn because it doesn't sound human anymore. And sometimes it was just one single word, shouted over and over, until the throat behind it cracked and, "No! No!" One man, a lifer named Kincaid, swore he saw shadows pacing under the door of 3A, long and jagged like someone walking back and forth inside. He told anyone who'd listen that he counted the steps, 5 forward, 5 back, 5 forward, 5 back, always the same rhythm. He said whatever was in there wasn't just screaming, it was walking, pacing, wearing grooves in the floor like it couldn't sit still. The guards told him he was hallucinating from stress. Kincaid said he'd been in prison 20 years and knew the difference between his imagination and something real. By the 3rd month, the guards started cracking too. One of them, a rookie only 2 weeks on the job, refused to do night shift in East Wing after he swore he heard his own name being screamed from inside 3A. He quit the next morning, no explanation, just threw his badge on the desk and walked out. The older guards tried to hold the line, but even they started to look pale whenever they made their rounds. Some nights, they claimed the screams weren't just inside the cell anymore. They said it felt like the whole hallway shook with them, vibrating through the metal doors, rattling the glass in the watch station. Then came the night it changed. It wasn't just screaming anymore. It was talking, clear, guttural words. One of the inmates in the block, this guy Ramirez, swore he heard a voice rasp through the vents saying, "He won't stop," over and over, in a tone so low it sounded like a growl. Ramirez nearly tore his hair out trying to block his ears. When the guards went in to check, they found something they couldn't explain. The cell door was still locked, but the inside was different. The concrete wall at the back, which had always been plain and gray, now had scratch marks gouged into it. Dozens of them, long, frantic lines, like fingernails dragged until they broke. The dust from the fresh scratches was still on the floor. Word spread through the prison like wildfire. Men who'd never believed in ghosts before refused to be housed anywhere near the East Wing. Some even tried to get themselves thrown in solitary on the other side of the prison, just so they wouldn't have to hear it. Guards started skipping cell 3A on their rounds, pretending not to notice when the screams started. But they couldn't ignore what came next. On a stormy night in October, lightning knocking the power out in half the prison, the screaming began again. But this time it wasn't confined. Every single door in the East Wing rattled as if fists were slamming from inside. The men inside their cells shouted, begged to be let out, but the guards were frozen in the hallway. They swore later that every door handle turned at once, like someone unseen was testing them, trying to get in. The sound of nails dragging across metal filled the block, louder than the storm outside. Finally, when the lights flickered back on, everything stopped, dead quiet. But the damage was done. The guards opened cell 3A one last time that night. What they found made even the hardest of them pale. The concrete grooves were deeper now, running all the way down to the floor. And etched into the wall above the bed frame were words, jagged, uneven, carved by something desperate, steel or... After that, they sealed the cell for good, welded the door shut, bricked over the slot, pretended it didn't exist. Officially, Redgate Prison doesn't even list a cell 3A anymore. It's been erased from the maps, from the records, from the tours they give to new officers. But the men who were there still tell the same story. They say if you stand in that corridor at 200 a.m., you'll hear it. The muffled, choked scream of a man who's been locked away for decades. A man who never left that cell. A man whose torment is so strong it refuses to die. The warden tries to dismiss it. He says it's just stories inmates tell to spook each other. But then why? Late at night, do guards still refuse to walk that wing alone? Why do new officers last only a few shifts before begging to be reassigned? And why, on stormy nights when the power cuts out, do people in the neighboring blocks say they can hear the sound of footsteps pacing 5 forward, 5 back inside a cell that hasn't held a living man for over a decade? Whatever's trapped in 3A, it's not going anywhere. And the worst part, the screams haven't faded. If anything, they're getting louder. They say every prison has one cell that no one wants, not because of who's inside it, but because of what's happened there. At Blackthorn Penitentiary, that cell was number 9 in the old 19th century wing, the part of the prison that was built when torches still burned in the hallways and men were chained to the walls like animals. Even after renovations, even after electricity and plumbing came in, Cell 9 kept its reputation. Guards avoided it. Inmates begged not to be placed there, and the ones who ended up inside swore they'd rather take solitary in the hole than spend a single night with its walls. The story always starts with a man named Joseph Crane. He wasn't the toughest inmate in Blackthorn. He wasn't the smartest either, but he was deeply, painfully religious. He carried a small Bible with him everywhere, dog-eared and falling apart, and he prayed constantly, before meals, before bed, in the mornings when the sun cut through the narrow window above the block. Other inmates mocked him for it, but he never stopped. He'd been given 15 years for arson, but he claimed he was innocent, that he'd been framed, and that God would deliver him. By the time he was moved into Cell 9, he'd already served 5 years without trouble. At first, nothing seemed strange. The cell looked like any other, cracked stone walls, iron bars, a thin mattress with more holes than stuffing. But Joseph wrote in letters later smuggled out that from the first night, he couldn't shake the feeling that the cell was breathing. He said the air felt warmer, wetter, heavier, like standing in the back pew of a crowded church, where the incense choked your lungs. He told his fellow inmates through whispers on the yard that every time he opened his Bible in that cell, the atmosphere shifted. The first incident came during an evening prayer. Joseph was kneeling by his bunk, hands clasped, whispering Psalm 23. He heard a sound, steady, rhythmic, almost like water dripping onto stone. He thought it was a leaky pipe until he looked up. On the wall above his bed, dark droplets were trailing downward, one after the other, staining the stone. He leaned closer and realized it wasn't water. The streaks were deep red. He shouted for the guard. By the time the officer unlocked the door, the wall was clean. Not a mark, not a drop. The guard threatened him with solitary for making noise. But Joseph swore it happened. He swore he could still smell the iron tang of blood in the air. Over the weeks, it happened again and again. Each time, it was when he prayed. Sometimes it was just a few drips running down the wall like sweat. Other times, it was heavy, streaking the stones until the whole corner looked soaked. And always, by the time the guards came, it was gone. At first, the other inmates laughed, but then they started hearing it too. At night, when the block went quiet, men in the nearby cells claimed they heard faint trickling, the sound of liquid dripping steadily onto the floor. Some even said they smelled it, the coppery reek of blood seeping through the cracks in the stone. One prisoner named Hayes swore he saw it with his own eyes. He'd been on cleaning duty, mopping the corridor, when he glanced through Joseph's bars. He said the walls weren't just wet, they were pulsing. Dark patches were swelling and sinking, like veins under skin, and from them, a thin sheen of red liquid seeped out. Hayes dropped the mop and refused to go near that wing again. The guards wrote him up for insubordination. He didn't care. He told everyone who would listen that Cell 9 was alive. The warden dismissed it all as hysteria, but the officers began noticing things too. One guard wrote in his incident log that when he passed Cell 9 during night rounds, his boots stuck to the floor as if the stone had been slick. Another said he saw faint red stains across Joseph's bedding, stains that vanished when he came back minutes later. Yet whenever they tried to investigate, the cell was spotless. Joseph's letters became more frantic. He wrote that the walls whispered when he prayed, voices layered on voices, some sobbing, some laughing, some calling his name. He begged for a new assignment, but the administration denied it. They thought he was losing his mind. Then came the night everyone in the block remembered. Joseph began praying louder than usual, his voice echoing off the walls. The men in nearby cells joined in, mocking him, shouting curses and jokes. But then, one by one, they fell silent. A noise spread through the wing, louder than anything before. Dripping, pouring, rushing, like a waterfall slamming against stone. Inmates screamed that blood was pouring from Joseph's cell, seeping under the door. Guards ran in, unlocking the block, shouting for order. When they reached Cell 9, Joseph was on his knees, hands clasped so tight his knuckles were bone white. His eyes were rolled back in his head, and behind him, the wall was drenched in red, a glistening sheet running from ceiling to floor. Guards swore they saw it with their own eyes. The stench was overwhelming, metallic and sour. One officer gagged and stumbled back. They pulled Joseph out, slammed the cell door, and when they opened it again, the wall was dry. Not a single stain, just cold, cracked stone. The next morning, the prison brought in painters. They scrubbed the cell top to bottom, bleached the walls, painted them bright white, but by nightfall, the stains bled through. Thin, dark streaks oozed down the corners, cutting through the fresh coat like veins through skin. No matter how many times they painted, the marks came back, and always, they came back darker. Joseph lasted 3 more weeks before he was found dead on his bunk. No wounds, no struggle, just lifeless eyes wide open. On the wall above him were words scrawled in red that no one could explain. El eat me, O Ute. After his death, the prison sealed Cell 9. They locked the bars, chained the door, and marked it unsafe. But the men still talk about it. Guards passing that corridor say they hear dripping in the dark. Some say on quiet nights you can hear Joseph praying, a desperate, broken whisper begging for release. Inmates swear that when they pass by, they smell rust and iron like old blood, and more than one guard has filed reports that fresh red stains still seep through the cracks in the mortar, spreading slowly across the outside wall, as if the cell itself is bleeding from within. Blackthorn no longer uses the old wing. It's been abandoned for years, left to rot. But those who work there still tell the story of Cell 9. They say whatever happened to Joseph Crane didn't end with him. The walls remember, the walls still bleed, and if you ever stand in front of that sealed door long enough, you'll hear it too. The steady, deliberate dripping of something alive inside stone, waiting for the next prayer to set it free. They say prisons are built to contain chaos, but sometimes the walls themselves can't hold back what's waiting in the dark. One night, inside a maximum security prison buried deep in the Midwest, something happened that left even the hardest guards refusing to step near one particular wing after sunset. It was a night when an entire cell block, 20 inmates, doors, beds, everything, seemed to vanish from existence. And the scariest part wasn't that they disappeared, it was that they came back. It started with a head count. Midnight was always the time the guards dreaded most. The routine was simple: walk the tier, call names, tick the list. But that night, when Officer Daniels reached cell block D, his clipboard suddenly felt heavier in his hands. He counted the cells, counted again, but the math wasn't adding up. 20 men, gone. Not a single voice responded, not a single figure stirred behind the bars. The cells weren't broken open, no alarms triggered, just silent, locked cages staring back at him like empty eyes. Daniels thought maybe it was a prank, some coordinated silence from the inmates. He rattled on the bars, banged his flashlight against the steel. Nothing. No cough, no shuffle of feet, no muttered curse. He radioed for backup. Within minutes, 3 more guards were there, all shining their lights into the empty cells. Their beams cut across the walls, bounced off bunks, traced the outlines of toilets and sinks. But not a single human shadow stretched back. They unlocked the corridor door and stepped inside, boots echoing on the concrete. The hallway seemed darker than usual, as if the overhead lights couldn't fully pierce it. The deeper they went, the more it felt like the air itself was pressing against their lungs. Daniels swore the corridor was longer than it should have been, like every step carried them further into some stretched out version of cell block D. One of the guards muttered under his breath, "It's like they were never here." The prison warden arrived within the hour. By then, panic was rising. 20 men don't just vanish. A full lockdown was declared. Search teams swept every hallway, every vent, every yard. Dogs were brought in, but they whined at the threshold of cell block D and refused to enter. Cameras were checked, and that's where things got worse. The security footage didn't show a riot, a breakout, or even a disturbance. Instead, it showed something impossible. From 11:53 p.m. until 6:12 a.m., the cameras that pointed into the cell block showed nothing. Just black. Not static, not malfunction. Just empty frames, as though the corridor had been erased from the world. When the feed finally returned, it showed all 20 inmates back in their bunks, lying still, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. At sunrise, Daniels and the other guards returned to the block. The cells were full again. The men were back. But when questioned, every single inmate gave the same story. They hadn't gone anywhere. To them, no time had passed. "We just closed our eyes," one said, "and opened them. What's the big deal?" But Daniels swore their voices didn't sound the same. There was a flatness to them, as if they were speaking from somewhere far away. A few even smiled when the guards asked questions, not amused, but knowingly, like they were hiding something. Later that day, during meal call, one prisoner finally broke. His name was Torres, a lifer with nothing left to lose. He pulled Daniels aside and whispered, "We weren't here, none of us. But you don't want to know where we went." When Daniels pressed, Torres's eyes filled with tears, and he shook his head. "There's no name for that place. Just don't let them make you sleep in here." That night, Daniels refused to take the head count. Another guard went in his place. When the count came in clear, Daniels thought maybe it was over. But then Torres was found dead in his cell the next morning, no signs of struggle. Just his body curled up in the corner, his hands clawing at his own chest, as if trying to dig something out. On the wall above him, scratched into the paint with bloody fingernails, were 3 words, "Don't follow us." The warden tried to bury it. Official reports listed Torres's death as heart failure. The missing count was explained as a clerical error. Cameras, they said, had glitched, but Daniels knew better. The other inmates had started to act different, too, sleepwalking, speaking in languages none of them knew, humming songs in the dark. Then came the nightmares. Guards began to complain of waking up at exactly 3:07 a.m., hearing voices calling from the direction of cell block D. The voices were pleading, begging, sometimes screaming, other times whispering sweetly like a mother calling her child home. A few guards quit on the spot. Others tried to transfer but were denied. Daniels held out longer than most, but one night, as he passed near the block, he heard something that finally broke him. 20 voices, chanting in unison from behind the steel doors. "We're not supposed to be back. We're not supposed to be back." He ran. He didn't even care if it cost him his job. And the cameras, they kept glitching night after night, each time longer than before. Each time showing the block empty, as though it was slipping further and further away. Some say the inmates were being taken somewhere else, returned only at dawn. Others say what came back wasn't them at all. The prison still operates today, but cell block D has been sealed off. Officially, it's due to structural issues. Unofficially, the guards say you can still hear voices from behind those locked doors if you press your ear to the wall. Some are begging to be let out, others are warning you to keep away, and one, just one, sounds exactly like Torres. If you ever find yourself standing outside a prison at night, and you see one hallway with the lights still burning, but no movement inside, you might be looking at the place where 20 men vanished into thin air. And if you wait long enough, you might just see them come back. But don't make the mistake of wondering where they went, because they'll hear you wondering, and they'll want to take you with them next time. In prison, rumors spread faster than fire, and most of them die out just as quickly. But there was one rumor, buried in the concrete walls of an old penitentiary, that refused to fade. It wasn't about gangs or escapes or contraband smuggled past the guards. It was about a man who never ate. Not a single bite, not a crumb, not a sip. For 6 months straight, his meal trays went back untouched, yet somehow, impossibly, his body never thinned, never weakened, never changed. And the whispers among the inmates weren't about how he survived. They were about what, or who, he fed on instead. It began quietly. The guards on the night shift were the first to notice. Every morning, the trays lined up outside the cells bore some evidence of being picked at. A spoon smeared with beans, a half-drunk carton of milk, but his, always spotless, not clean but untouched, like the food had been slid in and never so much as sniffed. At first, the guards joked about it. "He's on a hunger strike," one said. Another muttered, "Maybe he's saving up for the afterlife." But when weeks passed, then months, and the man remained upright, alert, and disturbingly calm, the joke stopped. His name, at least in the files, was John Galloway, a lifer convicted of crimes too grim to read aloud during sentencing. But in the cell block, names lose meaning. The others just called him the Hollow, and when lights went out, when the steel doors clanged shut, and the silence of the prison deepened into that unique, suffocating darkness, the Hollow would begin to move. No one saw him eat, but they heard him, breathing slow, heavy, deliberate. It would start at one end of the corridor, then drift along the line of cells, lingering at each door. Inmates said it felt like a weight pressed against their chests, like he was leaning against the bars, inhaling the fear pouring off them. The sound wasn't human, they claimed. It was too wet, too ragged, too close. And when he finally drifted on, the men would lie there in silence, afraid to move, afraid to even whisper. The guards dismissed it at first as paranoia. Prisoners invent monsters all the time to distract themselves. But then the reports started piling up. Inmate after inmate filed complaints, not about missing food or stolen items, but about waking with marks on their skin. Thin red lines across the chest, circular indentations on the arms, strange bruises blooming overnight. One man swore he woke up to find his lips trembling, his lungs etching, as if he'd been gasping for air for hours. Another said he saw 2 faint punctures on his shoulder, like someone had pressed teeth into him. When the warden finally ordered an inspection, they found nothing. The Hollow sat on his bunk, silent, staring, his tray still full, his body still intact. No cuts, no bruises, no signs of struggle. He only smiled, a faint curl of his lips, as though the warden's questions were beneath him. But something changed after that. The inmates began to weaken. Men who had been tough, hardened, violent. Suddenly they couldn't keep food down. Their eyes grew sunken, their hands trembled, their skin paled. The doctors chalked it up to stress, bad diets, withdrawal. But the prisoners knew. They said the Hollow wasn't starving. He was feeding, just not on food. At night, his breathing got louder. Some swore they felt it on their necks, warm and damp, even though steel bars separated them. Others said they saw him in their dreams, standing over their beds, his jaw unhinged, inhaling something invisible from their lungs. By morning, they woke drenched in sweat, too weak to rise. The breaking point came when the Hollow was scheduled for transfer. Officially, the report listed medical observation. Unofficially, the guards couldn't take it anymore. No one wanted to walk past his cell. Men assigned to that block quit, traded shifts, even feigned illness to avoid him. When the day arrived, they dragged him out in shackles. He didn't resist, didn't speak. He just let out one slow, rattling breath that echoed down the hall and made every man watching flinch. For a brief moment, the block felt lighter. The inmates breathed easier, ate again, even joked. They thought it was over. But then they assigned a new prisoner to his cell. The man's name was Eric, a car thief serving a short sentence. Young, cocky, not afraid of stories. He laughed when the others warned him, called them gullible, desperate, crazy. But on his first night in the cell, that laughter curdled. Eric woke gasping, his throat dry, his lungs burning as though he'd been held underwater. His arms stung, his chest ached, and when he stumbled to the bars, clawing for air, the inmates across from him saw the marks. Tiny crescents of teeth. Eric begged for a transfer. He cried through the night, shaking, clutching his ribs, muttering that someone was still in there with him, breathing against his skin. The guards tried to calm him, but the older inmates only looked away. They knew, whatever John Galloway had been, whatever the Hollow had become, it hadn't left. After 3 nights, Eric was pulled from the block, trembling, pale as chalk. His cell was locked and sealed, never reassigned. The warden quietly had the record scrubbed. John Galloway's file was marked, retired. Officially, he no longer existed. No parole hearings, no transfers, no paperwork. Just a blank space where his name had been. But the guards still talk. They say at night, when the block is quiet, you can hear breathing from behind that sealed door. Slow, deliberate, heavy. They say if you stand too close, your chest will tighten, your throat will close, and you'll feel something inside you tugging loose, as if being pulled out. And the worst part, no one knows where Galloway went. No prison, no hospital, no grave. It's as if he dissolved into the air. Some whisper that he was never really human, that he was something wearing a man's skin, passing through prison walls in search of something he couldn't get outside. Others believe he's still in that cell, sealed up, feeding on anyone foolish enough to lean too close. So if you ever find yourself walking past a prison at night, and the wind carries the sound of slow, rattling breaths, don't stop, don't listen. And above all, don't let curiosity drag you toward the walls. Because if he finds you, you won't need food either. You'll be just like him, hollow. They say death is the one thing prison can promise you. No matter who you are, what you did, or how long you're serving, when the state straps you into that chair and pulls the switch, it's supposed to be final. But in one prison, tucked away in the South, there's a story the guards don't like to tell. It's about a man who was executed, buried, his case closed forever. And yet, the night after his death, he was seen pacing in his old block as though nothing had ever happened. Some call it a ghost story. Others swear it wasn't a ghost at all. It was him, alive, still waiting. His name was Leonard Ray Dawson, though everyone inside just called him Red. Not because of his hair. He didn't have any left after years inside, but because of the crime that put him on death row. It was brutal, bloody, the kind of thing even hardened killers didn't want to discuss in the yard. Red was the kind of man who smiled in court while the families of his victims cried. He didn't beg for mercy, didn't apologize, didn't even blink when the judge read the sentence. It was as if he was looking forward to the chair. On the night of the execution, the prison was tense. Death row always got that way. Some of the younger guards pretended to be tough, cracking jokes about the smell of burning flesh, but everyone felt it. The weight in the air, the knowledge that they were about to snuff out a life. The warden walked the hall slowly, as if dragging time out. The preacher whispered prayers. Red just grinned. When they strapped him down, he didn't resist. He looked around the chamber like it was the best seat in the house. His eyes locked on the observation window, where a handful of witnesses stood. He mouthed something no one could make out. Then the switch was thrown. the room filled with that awful sound. Electricity tearing through flesh, muscles locking, the hiss of smoke. Red's body jerked once, twice, then slumped. The doctor came forward, checked the pulse, and announced the time of death. Case closed. Or so it should have been. The next night, during rounds, a guard named Halverson swore he saw Red pacing back and forth in his old cell. At first, he thought he was losing it. Execution was hard on a man's mind, especially if it was the first one you'd seen. But Halverson blinked, rubbed his eyes, and there he was, Red, walking from wall to wall, turning sharp over and over again, just like he used to when he was alive. His orange jumpsuit looked crisp, his head turned sharply, and for a split second, Halverson swore their eyes met. He dropped his flashlight. When he scrambled to pick it up, the cell was empty. Word spread fast. Some laughed it off, others got nervous. A few guards whispered that maybe Red's execution hadn't taken. Maybe the chair hadn't done the job, and someone had put him back in his cell to cover it up. But that was impossible. Everyone saw his body taken out, zipped up in a black bag, loaded into a van. The paperwork was signed, yet 2 nights later another guard reported the same thing. Red, standing at the bars, gripping them so hard his knuckles looked bone, white, staring silently as if waiting to be fed. When the guard approached, the figure faded back into the dark. The prison tried to squash the rumors. Warden said it was stress, imagination, leftover guilt. But then the inmates started talking. Men in neighboring blocks swore they heard footsteps at night, pacing, pacing, pacing. A rhythm that echoed through the pipes. One man yelled out to shut up the noise, and a voice answered back. A low, rasping chuckle that everyone recognized. Red's laugh. The guards started avoiding that block at night. If they had to pass it, they walked fast, eyes straight ahead. A few transferred out entirely, but one young guard, new to the job, thought it was all nonsense. His name was Porter, barely 23, still full of swagger. He bragged he'd deliver Red's old cell his tray personally, just to prove everyone else was scared of shadows. And that's exactly what he did. He walked up with a tray balanced in one hand, rapped the bars with his knuckles, and said, "Dinner time." Then he slid it in. When he turned to walk away, he swore he heard the scrape of the tray being pulled across the floor. He froze. He hadn't imagined it. The sound was real. Porter didn't last a week after that. He handed in his badge, left the state, never looked back. But before he left, he told one friend something chilling, that when he slid the tray in, a hand had brushed against his. Cold, dry, and strong. Years passed. The story became legend. New guards dismissed it until they saw something themselves. A shadow behind the bars. A pair of eyes glinting in the dark. A voice whispering their name. And then there was the wall. One morning, during a routine inspection, a guard noticed fresh scratches on the inside of Red's old cell. Not faded etchings, not old graffiti. Fresh, sharp letters carved into the concrete. 4 words, "I'm Stalawa." The cell was supposed to be sealed. No one had been inside for years. The prison quietly bricked the cell over after that. To outsiders, it doesn't exist anymore. But the guards who've been there long enough know where it is. A smooth patch of wall, colder than the rest, that you can feel humming if you press your hand against it. Like electricity waiting to be unleashed. And sometimes when the lights flicker in that wing, the hum grows louder. The sound of pacing footsteps rises again. And somewhere beneath it all, you can hear that laugh. Red's laugh, so maybe the execution did end. Maybe the man really died in that chair. But if that's true, then what's pacing behind the walls now? What's whispering to the guards in the dark? And who's been carving his name, fresh, year after year, into concrete that no living hand can reach? Some deaths are final. His wasn't. And if you ever find yourself standing in an empty prison corridor, don't stop when you hear the footsteps behind you. Don't look back. Because if you do, you might just see him, grinning, waiting, as if the execution never ended at all. As every prison has a place where the rules of silence break, where even the hardest men stop laughing, stop joking, and stop pretending they aren't afraid. For most prisons, it's the death row block or the solitary wing. But in one place, buried deep in the south, the most feared spot wasn't the cells or the yard. It was the chapel. You'd think a chapel would bring peace, a little bit of hope for the hopeless. But in this prison, hope never survived those walls. Every Sunday, when the priest stood before rows of empty pews, he wasn't alone. The voices of men long dead sang back to him, filling the chapel with a hymn that no one had dared to teach them. The chapel wasn't much to look at. Old stone walls, chipped plaster, a faded cross that leaned just slightly like it was tired of watching. The pews were handmade, scarred by initials carved into the wood by men desperate to leave their mark before the state erased them for good. A cracked window let in sunlight during the day, but at night, moonlight would spill in silver streaks across the altar, lighting up dust motes that drifted like spirits searching for someone to cling to. For years, the place sat mostly empty. Prisoners didn't come to pray, not really. They came for the chance to sit in silence, to breathe air that didn't stink of sweat and iron. But they never stayed long, because the longer you sat there, the more likely it was you'd hear the voices. The first report came from a guard named Collins. He was walking past the chapel late one night after lockdown when he heard the low murmur of men talking. Not arguing, not shouting, but whispering like they were reciting something together. He thought maybe a group of inmates had snuck in, so he pulled open the heavy door and stepped inside. The chapel was empty, but the sound didn't stop. It came from the back pews, low and steady, like a congregation singing a hymn that only they knew. Collins swore he felt the vibration of voices in his chest, though the pews sat bare in front of him. He left the lights on all night, hoping brightness might push whatever it was back into the dark. The chaplain wasn't surprised when he heard the story. He'd been hearing the same thing for years. Sometimes when he led service, the prisoners who did show up would glance nervously toward the back pews. One swore he heard his own name being whispered in the middle of a prayer. Another broke down, shouting that he wouldn't sit in there again. By the following Sunday, no inmate would step foot inside. The chaplain ended up preaching to empty benches, his own voice echoing, until the echoes weren't his anymore. The warden tried locking the chapel for a week, claiming the stories were a distraction, but that only made things worse. Guards patrolling nearby swore they heard the voices through the stone walls, louder now, angry that the door was closed. One night, an officer heard the sound of a full choir singing a hymn he couldn't recognize. He pressed his ear to the wall, heart racing, but the moment he stepped back, the sound stopped. Silence pressed down so heavy he nearly choked on it. The prison tried everything. They replaced the old pews, painted over the walls, even replaced the cracked window. But nothing changed. The voices never stopped. Sometimes they hummed softly, low and almost soothing. Other times they shouted, a roar of men begging to be heard. But the worst nights came before executions. Hours before a man was taken to the chamber, guards claimed the voices would rise like a warning. They'd chant, not hymns, not prayers, but names. Always the names of the condemned, the men scheduled to die. One guard, a veteran named Rourke, said he never believed in ghosts until that night. He was standing outside the chapel when he heard his own name whispered clear as day, over and over, like a choir of 100 throats. He froze, terrified. His execution wasn't scheduled, of course, but that wasn't the point. The next morning, he turned in his badge and never came back. He said the voices weren't predicting death. They were claiming it. What makes the story worse is the history no one likes to mention. Decades earlier, back in the 1940s, the prison didn't have a chamber or a gallows. Back then, executions were carried out in the chapel basement, quick, quiet, with only a handful of guards and a preacher. Some say dozens of men met their end beneath the altar, their bodies carried out through a side door in the dead of night. Records are scarce, but a few dusty files confirm at least 27 men were killed there before the state built a proper death house. The chapel was washed, repainted, and reopened like nothing had ever happened. But walls don't forget. Even today, when the chapel microphones are left on for maintenance checks, engineers sometimes hear something through the feed. Not static, not feedback, voices. Chanting, sometimes it's scripture, sometimes songs, but more often it's names. Not old names either. Current prisoners. Men still alive, serving time. Guards swear that once a name is heard in the chapel, it's only a matter of time before that man ends up in the infirmary, the hole, or worse. Last year, one inmate told the chaplain he sat in the back pew alone one night, trying to test himself to prove he wasn't scared. At first, silence. Then a cold weight pressed down on him, like someone sliding onto the bench beside him. He said he heard dozens of breaths in the dark, all around, pulling in unison. And then one word whispered directly in his ear, "Confess." He ran screaming, and when guards caught him in the yard, his hair had gone white in a single night. Now the chapel stays mostly empty. No one dares to linger after dark. And when the chaplain preaches on Sunday, his words bounce off silent stone. But sometimes, when the light hits just right through the cracked window, you can see the dust swirl in shapes that don't match the air. Rows of shoulders shifting, heads bowing, lips moving. And if you close your eyes, you'll hear them, the men who never left, singing in voices raw and endless, filling the chapel with a hymn no living soul has ever written down. And the worst part, they don't sound angry, they sound patient, like they know everyone in that prison will eventually join them, one by one, name by name, until every pew is full again. It started with something so small that most inmates would have ignored it, a whisper, faint, almost buried in the constant hiss of pipes and dripping faucets inside the prison's shower block. But the man who heard it, Rodriguez, froze, because the whisper wasn't random. It said his name, clear as day. Rodriguez. He turned, soap still clutched in his hand, water streaming over his face. Nobody was near him. The closest inmate was 2 stalls down, humming to himself. Rodriguez crouched low, his ear near the drain, heart hammering in his chest. And then he heard it again, but this time a little louder, almost playful. "Rodriguez, I know what you did." At first, he thought it was a prank. Prisoners loved messing with each other, especially in places where guards didn't watch too closely. But as he listened, the whisper kept describing things nobody else should know. Specific details of the night Rodriguez had killed a man on the street, the way the blood had soaked into his shoes, the sound the body made when it hit the pavement. He staggered back, pale and shaking, because Rodriguez had never confessed those details, not even in court. Word spread fast. The drain talks. Inmates muttered under their breath. Some laughed, brushing it off as a ghost story. But then more men began to hear voices while showering. Different voices. Some soft, some guttural, all of them personal. One inmate swore the drain spoke in his mother's voice, begging him to come home. Another said the voice was his old victim, crying for help. The whispers never shouted. They never demanded, they just knew things. Things the prisoners didn't want anyone to know. By week's end, the shower block became a place of dread. Inmates rushed through their showers, barely rinsing off before bolting out, eyes wide and nervous. A few even refused to bathe altogether, preferring to stink rather than risk hearing their past crimes narrated back to them. Guards started complaining about the smell in the cell blocks. But when they tried to order the men back into the showers, the prisoners resisted like terrified children. One night, a guard named Miller decided to prove it was all nonsense. He dragged an inmate down to the showers and told him to clean himself up. The man was trembling, begging not to go in. Miller mocked him, calling him a coward, and shoved him under the spray. For a few moments, nothing happened. The prisoner muttered curses under his breath, lathering soap quickly, trying to finish. Then suddenly he froze. His face went slack, eyes staring straight ahead. The guard frowned. "What the hell's wrong with you?" he barked. That's when the inmate let out a scream so piercing it echoed across the entire block. He scrambled out of the stall, naked and soaked, clawing at his skin as though something had crawled up from the drain and touched him.
It knows. It knows everything.
He shrieked, collapsing to the floor. Miller tried to calm him down, but the man wouldn't stop sobbing. It said my daughter's name. She was only 6. I never told anyone. His words trailed off into choking sobs. After that, even the guards stopped pushing the showers. Some even admitted, quietly, that during late-night patrols, they too heard strange murmurs from the pipes, as if someone deep underground was whispering upward through the drains. The warden ordered maintenance crews to investigate. They assumed it was a simple issue, rusty pipes carrying sound from other parts of the prison. But when the maintenance workers went down into the bowels of the facility, they found something strange. The drains weren't connected to anything. The old tunnels had been sealed off decades ago after flooding had made them unsafe. The shower block drains were capped. There was nowhere for voices to travel, no pipes to carry sound. When the report came back, the prison went silent. If the drains weren't connected, then who or what was speaking? Things only got worse. The whispers grew bolder. Inmates claimed the voices began laughing at them, taunting them. A few said they could see shapes moving in the standing water around the drains, dark finger-like smudges just beneath the surface. One prisoner swore a pale hand pushed against the metal grate for just a second before vanishing. He refused to go near the showers again, no matter the punishment. Guards began noticing something else, scratches. Around the circular edges of the drains, faint at first, like someone had been scraping from underneath. But every day, the marks grew deeper, sharper, more desperate, until it was obvious that whatever was down there wasn't just whispering. It was trying to get out. Late one evening, Miller, the same guard who mocked the inmates, volunteered to do a sweep of the shower block after lights out. He walked the echoing tiles alone, flashlight cutting through the mist. The place smelled of mildew and rust. He paused by one of the drains, crouching down, smirking. "All right, let's hear it then," he muttered. He pressed his ear close. For a long moment there was nothing but the faint gurgle of water. Then a voice came, soft, right against his ear. "Miller." He jerked back, flashlight shaking in his hands. The voice chuckled low, wet and gurgling. "I'm coming up." The light flickered. Something metallic clanged beneath the floor, as though a chain had been yanked. Miller staggered back, breathing hard. He radioed in, but the static drowned out his voice. He swore he saw the drain cover shift slightly, just enough to make a faint scraping noise. By the time backup arrived, Miller was gone. His flashlight lay on the wet tile, still glowing. The only sign of him was a smear of water leading into the drain, a drain too small for any human body to fit through. The shower block was sealed off after that night. Prisoners were moved to another wing with temporary facilities. But every so often, the guards on night patrol still swear they hear faint whispers echoing from behind those locked doors. Whispers that carry names, whispers that promise one day the drains will open again. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear scratching from underneath. The prison yard was still wrapped in that heavy silence that always falls just before sunrise. Guards leaned on their rifles, bored, half awake, waiting for the day shift to kick in. Then, right on schedule, headlights cut through the mist. A transfer bus, white paint peeling, iron grates bolted across its windows, rolled slowly through the gates. The guards stood straighter, expecting to see the driver's silhouette behind the wheel, maybe a chain of prisoners slumped in their seats. But the bus didn't stop at the checkpoint. It just glided forward like it already knew its way in. The engine purred low, steady, too steady. No one got out. No one leaned forward to wave papers or bark orders. Just the bus idling there, humming like a beast breathing in the fog. One of the guards finally climbed aboard. His boots echoed against the metal floor. That's when his stomach flipped. Every seat was empty. The restraints dangled loose, cuffs unlatched. The leather straps that should have been locked tight across torsos still carried the shape of bodies pressed into them. But there was no one there. Some of the seats were warm, as if men had just been sitting there. He touched the fabric and pulled his hand back like he'd been burned. His voice cracked as he shouted for backup. The others rushed in, flashlights cutting across the narrow aisle. There was no driver. The key still dangled in the ignition, engine rumbling. The driver's seatbelt was unbuckled, swaying slightly, like someone had only seconds ago slipped free. On the floor, a pack of cigarettes lay spilled. A half-drunk cup of coffee, still hot, sat in the cup holder. It didn't make sense. If no one was driving, then who the hell brought the bus here? The warden was called. He was furious at first, thinking the guards were screwing around. But when he stepped onto that bus, his face turned pale. He didn't shout, didn't even curse. He just stared at those warm seats and whispered, "Where are they?" Because this bus was supposed to be carrying 12 prisoners and 2 officers from a state facility 3 hours away. They'd been scheduled to arrive at dawn. The logs confirmed it. The call-ins confirmed it. But now nothing. They radioed the other prison. The line was tense, crackling. The other warden swore the bus had left the night before, right on time, full of chained inmates, escorted properly. It left with everyone accounted for. But no one ever saw it again until it pulled into the yard, completely empty. An investigation ripped through the prison system. The bus was towed, inspected, dismantled. Mechanics swore the thing couldn't have driven itself. No remote controls, no tech, no tampering. But what unsettled them most was what they found scratched beneath the seats. Deep grooves in the metal, marks that looked like fingernails dragging in wild desperation. Some seats had names etched into them, names that matched the missing inmates. As if they were carving proof of their existence into the bus itself. Terrified, they were already disappearing. The guards who touched the carving said the metal felt warm, almost pulsing, like a heartbeat. A few even claimed they could hear faint breathing if they pressed their ears close. The bus was locked in an impound lot while the state scrambled to cover the story. But at night, locals swore they saw its headlights flicker on, engine turning over all by itself. A few kids sneaked in once, curious, daring each other to climb aboard. Only one made it back out, sobbing uncontrollably, swearing the seats weren't empty anymore. He said they were full of shapes, slouched figures, faces half-formed, whispering in voices that sounded like broken radios. They asked me to sit with them. The boy stammered. They said there's always room for one more. The state hushed it up, declared the bus destroyed. But insiders know that wasn't true. It was moved, quietly to another facility far from roads, far from prying eyes. Yet guards there report strange malfunctions. Radios cutting out at the same time every night, footsteps echoing in the yard when no one's around, engines starting on their own. And once, a guard swore he saw the bus idling at the edge of the lot with a figure sitting in the driver's seat, head bowed. When he approached, the figure dissolved into smoke, leaving the seatbelt swinging like before. The 12 inmates and 2 officers were never found. Official reports list them as missing, presumed deceased. But the prison grapevine tells a different story. They say if you climb onto that bus, when the night is quiet enough, you'll hear them breathing beside you. You'll feel the cuffs tighten on your wrists. You'll see faces half glimpsed in the reflection of the windows. And once you hear them whisper your name, it's already too late to leave, because the bus always arrives on schedule. It doesn't matter if the prison is closed or the yard is empty. It will find its way in. It will wait for the next shift to notice its headlights in the fog. And every time it comes back, there are always more scratches in the metal, always more names. Some of them don't even belong to inmates anymore. Some of them belong to guards, and some belong to people who swore they only ever heard the story, but never stepped foot inside a prison at all. And that's the part nobody can explain. Story. They tell you that every prison has its ghost stories, but there's one in particular that guards at Redwater Correctional whisper about in low voices, only when the lights are bright and the halls are full of noise. It isn't about shadows at the end of the tier or disembodied screams echoing through solitary. No, This one is simpler, sharper, more terrifying. Every night, exactly at 3:12 a.m., cell 41 unlocks by itself. And that door doesn't just unlatch, it swings wide, slow as breath, like someone on the inside is holding the handle and letting it go. The cameras confirm it, the locks confirm it, the men who've heard it confirm it. The problem is, nobody has been inside that cell for almost 20 years. The first time I heard the story, I thought it was the usual nonsense. Ex-cons making up tales to mess with rookies, guards exaggerating to spice up the monotony. But the details never changed, no matter who told it. A certain cell, a certain time, the same sound, the lock clicks, metal grinding like teeth, the heavy door dragging across concrete. The veteran guards would cross themselves without thinking. Some of them refused to work the night shift on that block. A few even transferred out of Redwater altogether, like the risk of facing that door was worse than losing a paycheck. Here's how the story goes. Back in 1973, Cell 41 belonged to two men, Charles Harlan and Benny Stokes. Harlan was a thief with a mean streak, a man who'd been inside so many times he joked about having his mail forwarded there. Benny was new, young, scared, locked up for an armed robbery gone bad. They say he never wanted trouble, but trouble found him. Harlan took to tormenting him. Nights were the worst. Harlan whispering, kicking the bunk, keeping him from sleep. Then one night around 3:12, something inside that cell went very wrong. Guards doing rounds reported hearing banging, then silence. By the time they forced the door open, the scene inside was beyond anything they'd seen. Benny lay on the floor, throat cut with a sharpened spoon handle, blood pooled black across the concrete. But here's the strange part. Harlan wasn't standing over him. He wasn't anywhere. A full-scale search locked down the entire prison. Not a trace. The cameras showed no exit, no contact, no one walking out of cell 41. It was like the door had opened. Harlan had stepped into nothing, and the cell swallowed him whole. After that, inmates refused to bunk there. Guards complained of icy drafts drifting out even when the vents were sealed. Keys would jam in the lock. Lights would flicker in the corridor. Redwater administration eventually sealed the room, welded the door shut, and wrote it off as unsafe. But the weld didn't hold. Each time they sealed it, the same thing happened a few nights later. At exactly 3:12, the door would be open again. Fast forward to the early 2000s. A guard named Daniels thought the whole thing was a joke. He bragged he'd spend his entire shift parked outside cell 41 with a thermos of coffee and his baton, just to prove everyone else was spooked over nothing. That night, the cameras caught him sitting on a stool outside the door, humming to himself, tapping his foot. At 3:12 on the dot, the lock clicked. Daniels stood, still grinning like he was about to call out the prank. The door opened. He looked inside. The camera footage went to static for 43 seconds. When the picture returned, the door was wide open. Daniels' stool was still there. His coffee cup was still steaming, but Daniels was gone. Not missing in action, not attacked, gone. No trace. They searched the block, the yard, the crawl spaces, everything. He'd vanished into that cell like Harlan had 30 years before. Since then, Redwater treats cell 41 like a wound that won't heal. Officially, it's non-operational. Unofficially, guards make sure they're nowhere near that tier when the clock nears 3:12. But even distance doesn't save you from it. Men in neighboring blocks say they've woken to hear slow footsteps pacing inside the empty room. The sound of someone dragging a chain across the floor. Sometimes, if the night is quiet enough, they swear they can hear two voices whispering, one pleading, one laughing. And the darkest part, the logs. No one talks about the logs, but every guard who's ever been on night shift knows they exist. Redwater has a record of every time a cell opens or closes, coded automatically by the locking system. The logs for cell 41 show the same entry, night after night for the past 50 years. 3:12 a.m. on Oki.
314 AM Lasted.
No key, no override, no personnel, just the cell, keeping time like a clock that never stops. Last year, a rookie guard named Ramirez couldn't take the pressure anymore. He'd heard the whispers, he'd seen the log sheets, He'd even stood at the end of the corridor one night and watched, heart hammering, as the rusted door creaked open all on its own. He told his supervisor he was quitting the next day. He never got the chance. That same night, the cameras caught him walking alone down the hall toward cell 41 at 3:11 a.m. Nobody knows why. His shift was over. He should have been home. But there he was, slowing his steps as the lock clicked. The door opened. He hesitated only a second, then stepped inside. The door shut behind him. He never stepped back out. The cell was empty when they searched. Empty except for one new carving on the wall. 4 letters, scratched deep into the concrete, still wet with blood. R-A-M-I. The rest of the name unfinished, as though someone had dragged the letters out of him before he could complete them. Now the corridor is closed off entirely. The cameras have been removed. The logs have been lost. But the guards know. Every so often, if you pass near the old wing in the dead of night, you'll hear that sound. The heavy creak of a cell door swinging open, slow and patient, like someone inside has been waiting for you. And if you're unlucky enough to stand too close, you might feel a hand, cold and sharp, brush your arm and tug you forward. Not hard, not violent, just an invitation. Because Cell 41 doesn't care if you're a thief, a killer, or a guard. It doesn't care if you're guilty or innocent. It only cares that at 3:12 a.m. someone new steps through the threshold. And once you do, there is no record of you anymore. Just another whisper in the dark, another set of footsteps pacing a room that should have stayed empty. And that's why the veterans warn you. Don't look at the logs. Don't volunteer for the night shift on that tier. And above all, when the clock hits 3:12, do not stop walking. Because once the cell door opens, it opens for you. And Redwater has learned the hard way the door always closes again, but not from the outside. If this story left a chill crawling up your spine, imagine what's still locked away in the shadows of the world's darkest prisons. And trust me, this is just the beginning. Hit that like button if you want more of the stories they don't want you to hear. Subscribe now, because the next nightmare might be worse than anything you've heard tonight. And whatever you do, don't close your eyes.